Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a review of a couple of books. Sight by Jesse Greengrass and Omensetter's Luck by Williams Gass, which I had recorded an individual review of about a couple of weeks ago and brilliantly deleted it before uploading it. So take two. I'm going to start with Jesse Greengrass's Sight though, which was longlisted, possibly shortlisted, I can't remember now, for the Women's Prize. And the reason I'd held off reading it for a while is because it's very similar themes to my own novel, which now having been out for a few months, I feel I can now read this and see where we overlap and where we diverge. Because any two writers can take the same theme and have entirely different approaches to it, which I think I'm glad to report is the case for me and Jesse Greengrass, although we both are talking about motherhood and we are both using science as part of our sort of metaphorical system of what we're looking at in the novels. But anyway, enough about mine. So this is a book in three parts. It's about a mother to be who in part one her mother falls ill and she returns before she's in a relationship, before she's pregnant, she returns to the family home to nurse her mother. And her mother gets progressively worse and ends up in a nursing home, which she organises, the daughter organises. And while the mother's there, the daughter's living back in the old family home. And there's a lot of meditation on mothers and daughters and the relationship. And it's really a meditation on grief, because eventually the mother does die. I don't think it's a spoiler. And it's a long meditation on grief, and in places quite beautifully observed. Little details, that just sort of point up a real intimate sense of relationship. But what Greengrass does throughout all three sections is she also inserts a treatment of a sort of scientific approach to sight. So in the case of part one, she looks at the Dutch scientist Röntgen, who invented the X-ray or discovered the X-ray. And obviously the X-ray is a way of looking through the surface of the skin into the bones beneath. And she describes how, obviously it's very revolutionary to see what had previously been hidden. But Röntgen's wife, when she had her hand X-rayed and saw the bones beneath, she saw that as a symbol of death. And, obviously the two different ways that you could interpret the same thing. So that is part one, which is the sort of meditation on grief, on losing your mother before she had herself become a mother, set against the discovery of the X-rays. Then part two is Freud is the sort of science, if you can call it science, that is brought in, and how he analysed his own daughter Anna, which I've commented on in one of my other BookTube. Was it one of my BookTube? No, it's in a blog post I did about the sort of the dubious ethics of that, which Freud wasn't picked on at the time, but has since obviously been picked up on it as not only sort of an Oedipal complex that he's sort of instituting by analysing his own daughter, but actually it's almost a type of incest. And for the mother character in the novel, it's her casting her mind back to when she was a child. And every summer she used to go and stay with her grandmother in Hampstead. Her grandmother was a psychotherapist, a Freudian as far as I can tell. And she was sort of quite cold, detached, intellectual, and almost, there's this constant tension the whole time of, is she analysing her granddaughter? No, she isn't. But just because of how she approaches people, it's almost an analysis. And when her daughter, i.e. the daughter's mother, her relationship breaks down with her husband, and she goes and stays with her mother while the granddaughter's there as well, while her daughter's there as well, then it does sort of become a sort of a psychoanalysis. Now, in a way, I felt it was the strongest section of the whole book, in that I felt it got to grips with the emotions constantly throughout it, unlike the sort of slightly more fragmentary one of the first section on grief. Because in a way, having Freud being the study and the grandmother being a Freudian analyst. It was much more seamless, whereas the Röntgen stuff sort of stopped the action, fragmented and fractured the action of the mother's of the daughter's grief about the mother. Whereas this was much more sort of embedded because they were sort of the same things. But although it was the best bit in terms of what it yielded, in terms of information and insight into the characters, I have a problem with, there are two tropes in literature that I really don't enjoy. One is courtroom dramas, and the second is, analytical settings where someone is on a couch being analysed. Because to me, you can't do anything with them. They're always the same. They always follow the same ritual. They have to. They're built in a legal process in a court and a Freudian, in this case, analysis. And I don't find reading about them very interesting because they're all the same. Yes, the details are different. The case studies are different. The guy up in the dock is charged with a different, criminal accusation. But essentially they're the same. So as good as it was, I didn't enjoy it because, as I say, it's just a trope I don't like. And again, obviously, Röntgen, X-rays looking inside the body. Freud was sort of unlocking the unconsciousness, the part of our psyches that, we don't see. So again, it's just this thing about, looking inside, trying to delve beneath the surface in a quest for the character who's about to become a mother. So she's had a relationship with her mother. Now we see the relationship with her grandmother. And part 3 is her relationship with her partner, but more with the concept of becoming a mother herself. So that it's switched from part 1, where she's the daughter talking about her mother. Now she is the mother, relating back to her own daughter. And the scientist that's called in for this is John Hunter, who's the guy who started the Hunterian Museum in London, where he was an anatomist and sort of cast lots of different sort of scientific theories and tried to test them and stuff. But what he also did was he's a great collector of sort of animals and things like that. And on his death, his collection was willed to the Royal College of Surgeons and became the Hunterian Museum. And again, I found this a bit sort of fragmented because you get all this sort of beautiful lyrical language and insight, when she's thinking about her relationship to her daughter and her partner. But then it stops and you get a section on, in this case, John Hunter, which is very matter-of-fact, historical, researched. And there's none of the literary language. There's none of the lyrical language. It's just very matter of fact. It's like, I'm not accusing her of this, but it's as if she's wearing her research openly on the page. And there's not really been work, it has obviously been worked by the author, but it comes across as just a sort of a monograph. And that takes you out of the beautiful flow of the more personal stuff. And that's all, that's all I want to say about this book, really. I didn't know what to make of it. I give it 4 stars because it's extremely well written, well put together. I just don't think the structure quite worked for me. As I say, because you're going from a lyrical, literary style into a sort of more monograph, documentary style, which I found jarring because I like the literary stuff in terms of style, in terms of my reading pleasure. It also had that big second section on a particular trope I don't like, which is, not Greengrass's fault, it's just the trope I don't like. And ultimately, I'm not sure, there were lots of little details which were fabulous, but I didn't feel by the end of it that I'd gained a great oversight into motherhood. Even the motherhood of this particular character, I had lots of little bits, sort of tinctures, but not an overall portrait. So I struggled with that a bit. I'm just going to read 2 very short bits. So again, it's this idea, Hunter was an anatomist, again, looking inside the body. So, to become at last the Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons, housed now in their premises behind Holborn Station. Walking through it one Saturday afternoon with Johannes, nearing the end of my first pregnancy, I felt at that vast catalogue of the interior, the mechanics of living things, and all that bordered on bafflement, something important written too large for me to comprehend. And I think that encapsulates 2 of my caveats of this. It did seem to be too large to comprehend, that this book gave glimpses of it, but didn't encapsulate it or manage to, encompass the whole thing. And also that vast catalogue of the interior. Well, again, it is a vast catalogue, and this book wasn't able to navigate that vast interior. It managed to do little bits. So I felt the power of it, and do so still. How simple things would be if only I could know myself or others. If, stepping in between a light source and a screen, I could see the way that I was constituted, those hidden structures, the bones, the joints that give the rest its shape, and then I might know something for certain, that I was alive or that I would be dead. These two differently slanted articulations of the same fundamental understanding. But instead there is only this excavation, a digging in the dark, precarious, uncertain, impossible to complete. So again, very much making the same points really, which is absolutely valid. It's like, we can't, how much can we know ourselves? In my novel, from a sort of a genetic point of view, and the relationship between, the chemicals of DNA to lead to human consciousness, how much can we know of ourselves? But I just felt it was slightly caught between two stools by offering these sort of scientific insights to suggest that we do understand it. But the personal, and she's quite right, as I say, I think the personal is, no, we can't grasp it. But anyway, that was Sight. And on to William Gass Omensetter's Luck, take 2. So this was Gass's debut novel, published in 1966. And it takes place in the late 19th century in Ohio, in a rural setting. And it considers two main characters, Brackett Omensetter and Jethro Ferber. Now, Omensetter is a father of 2 daughters, and his wife is pregnant with their 3rd child, who he knows will be a son. And I'll explain why that's significant. And he decides that they're going to up and leave where they currently live and move to another village. So they pile everything on their horse-drawn cart. And even though the sky is full of sort of storm clouds and it's raining in other parts of the state, he doesn't cover it with a tarpaulin, and yet somehow they make the whole journey and they never get rained on, which is remarked as sort of, strange. And then he he rents a house that's right on the Ohio River and has a history of being flooded when the river swells. And again, in all his time there, his house remains untouched by the waters. And again, that is sort of, this is why it's called Omensetter's Luck, that all these sort of things that are against probability seem to happen onto him, that he's touched by grace somehow and spared all these things. And he himself is regarded as physically he looks like a brute of a man, and, puts some people's backs up just on how he appears. But he's very loving to his wife and his daughters. He's very much a family man. And this comes, so it's not about luck. It is more about grace, that despite his outward appearances, and despite the fact he doesn't go to church, he's the only person in the village who doesn't attend church, except on one notable occasion, which I'll talk about. So it's not Omensetter's luck, it's Omensetter's love, that he is touched by grace because he is full of love. And Jethro Ferber is the village preacher, a hellfire and damnation preacher, who is actually a very bad man. He lusts and leers after all the women in the village, and there's a lot of him talking about that. He has come from big city Cleveland, where his experience of canvas is not the revival meeting tent, but the circus tent. It's never fully explained, but he seems to have a background in the circus. And he's had to leave Cleveland for some unspecified, dark deed. And, we first see him, he's in the small graveyard in the front of the church where the previous preachers are buried. And he's sort of practicing his sermon by sort of addressing, the first preacher who, established the church. And he describes all the gravestones as like being the parishioners on the pews in the church. And when he first meets Omensetter, he shakes his hand, and Omensetter puts both of his hands around the preacher's hand. And Gass describes it as like, being the worm in the apple. The preacher's hand in between Omensetter's two is like the worm in the apple. So this is, set up as good versus evil, but the two roles are sort of reversed. That the preacher, who should be a good guy, full of piety and good thoughts, is actually you know, the bad guy spreading. He doesn't like Omensetter, partly because he doesn't go to church, but really because, you know, coincidentally, since Omensetter's arrived in town, his congregation have dropped off in numbers because they don't really respond to his, you know, fire and damnation preaching. But he blames Omensetter and sort of paints him as a sort of witch, which obviously has resonance in New England, because Omensetter's landlord, called Henry Pimber, he and Omensetter are walking and they see a fox has fallen down a well and it's too far down to sort of rescue. So they decide it would be a mercy to shoot it, put it out of its misery. And somehow in doing so, Pimber manages to get some shrapnel in his hand and gets very sick, gets infected with lockjaw, tetanus. And the doctor can't seem to, you know, help him, and he's getting worse and worse. And Omensetter comes up with this sort of, you know, homegrown folkloric remedy involving beetroot. And Pimber starts making a recovery. So, you know, to Ferber's mind, that proves that he's a witch. So Ferber is sort of spreading all these calumnies about Omensetter. And it all comes to a head. And I'm not going to spoil the ending. And it's just, you know, this has so many elements that I just normally wouldn't be interested in. You know, religion, good versus evil, you know, rural life in late 19th century America. But I was totally won over by this book. It was an absolute joy and a pleasure to read. There's not much more to say about it, really, without sort of giving spoilers. It does come to a climactic head in a very, you know, it's sort of portrayed as good versus evil up until the climax, where it's a lot more nuanced and shades of grey on both sides, which I just thought was supreme. Oh yes, the one time that Omensetter goes to church, you know, he's basically sort of challenged by Ferber, you know, you must come to my church. So the family turns up, and interestingly, Ferber loses his fire and brimstone powers of speech. You know, he just dries up, and he gives this sort of quite nice, lovey-dovey, you know, that side of Christianity sermon. And Ferber berates himself after, you know, what's happened? That guy's cast a spell over me, you know. Again, which sort of feeds his animosity towards Omensetter. So I just thought, you know, this is 4.5 out of 5. This is just a really pleasing read. The next gas book I've got is The Tunnel, which I'm 148 pages into. It's a massive tome, and I'm taking it very slowly, which seems to be very different. You know, this is, because it's dealing with good and evil, because it's dealing with a sort of, you know, 19th century village life and a preacher. It's quite conventional in its sort of plot and themes. You know, some of the stylistic things might not be conventional, but... And The Tunnel is just, you know, much more about Gas being a modernist and an experimentalist. I suppose there are elements of modernism in this, in the sort of the chorus of village voices, but it seems to have gone on to another level in The Tunnel. So there you have it. Those are the two books. Jesse Greengrass's Sight, which was 4 out of 5, and William Gass's Omensetter's Luck, which is 4.5. So till next time, thanks very much.